The laughter was a physical thing, sharp and ugly, and it struck Amara with the force of a slap. It came from a man named Henderson, a Florida-American businessman whose self-importance filled the space around him like a toxic cologne. He leaned over, his face flushed with champagne and arrogance, and gestured with a dismissive hand toward her wheelchair. "Dance?" he boomed to his sycophantic friends, making a show of it. "With that, I'd have to get on my knees, and the only time I do that is for a much better reason, if you know what I mean." His companions brayed with laughter. Amara felt her mother's hand tighten on her shoulder, a protective gesture that was both comforting and humiliating. Her father's jaw was a hard, angry line. They had wanted this night to be special. A charity gala at one of Chicago's most opulent hotels. A chance for their daughter, a brilliant 20-year-old architecture student trapped in a body that had betrayed her, to feel beautiful. Her dress was a masterpiece of deep emerald velvet, custom-tailored to drape elegantly over her seated form. Her hair was a crown of intricate braids woven with threads of gold. Her makeup was flawless. She was a queen on a throne, yet in this room, she was an obstacle, an object of pity or, worse, of cruel amusement. Her father, David, took a step forward, his voice a low rumble. "You have something to say to my daughter?" Henderson waved a dismissive hand. "Just having a laugh, old man. Relax. It's a party." Amara placed a hand on her father's arm.
"Dad, don't."
"He's not worth it." Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of long practice, of learning to swallow indignities to keep the peace. She had been in the chair for 2 years since the accident. 2 years of learning a new way to navigate the world, a world that was not built for her. She had mastered the physical challenges. It was the social ones, the casual cruelty of men like Henderson, that still left fresh wounds. She turned her chair slightly, a subtle, deliberate pivot away from the poison. Her gaze swept the ballroom, a desperate search for an escape. The room was a sea of glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos, a symphony of clinking glasses and forced laughter. She saw her parents' strained faces, the tension in their shoulders. They had tried so hard. This was supposed to be a victory, a defiant statement that her life was not over. Instead, it felt like a public execution of her confidence. One by one, her parents had asked men to dance with her. A young banker who stammered about a sprained ankle. A lawyer who suddenly had to take a very important call. A doctor who simply shook his head and walked away. Each refusal was a small cut. Henderson's mockery was the twisting of the knife. Her eyes, slick with tears she refused to let fall, continued their scan of the room. And then she saw him. He was standing near the grand archway leading to the terrace, a figure of absolute stillness in a room of frantic motion. He was not part of the chaos, he observed it. He was Asian, with sharp, intelligent features that looked as if they were carved from some unforgiving stone. His suit was a dark, charcoal gray, tailored with a precision that suggested it cost more than the car her father drove. It wasn't just expensive, it was armor. There was no wasted fabric, no unnecessary detail. It was a second skin for a man who moved through the world with lethal economy. Her architect's eye appreciated the structure of him, the perfect posture, the broad shoulders that tapered to a narrow waist. The way he held his hands, loosely clasped behind his back, suggested a wellspring of coiled power. But it was his eyes that held her. They were dark, bottomless, and they were not scanning the room aimlessly. They were fixed on the scene that had just unfolded. On Henderson. On her. He had seen everything. For a heartbeat, their gazes locked across the crowded floor. There was no pity in his eyes. There was no curiosity. There was something else, something colder and more complex. It was a look of assessment, of recognition. It felt as though he could see past the velvet dress and the wheelchair, past the paralysis, and was looking directly at the core of her, at the steel she had forged inside herself to survive. Then he moved. He pushed off from the archway, his steps silent and deliberate. The crowd seemed to part for him, not in a grand, cinematic way, but in a series of small, unconscious adjustments. People simply sensed they should not be in his path. He moved like the room owed him space, and the room agreed. He didn't look at Henderson. He didn't look at her parents. He walked directly toward her, his dark eyes never leaving hers. The ambient noise of the gala seemed to fade into a dull roar, the world narrowing to the space between them. He stopped in front of her wheelchair. He was taller than she had expected, casting a long shadow over her. He smelled of cedar and something clean and sharp, like winter air. He gave a slight, formal bow, a gesture so crisp and out of place in this boisterous American ballroom that it commanded immediate attention. Silence rippled out from them as people began to notice. "My name is Kwon Jinwoo," he said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, with no discernible accent, yet it carried the weight of a different language, a different world. "And I would be honored if you would grant me a dance." The world held its breath. Henderson, still smirking, scoffed loud enough for those nearby to hear. "What's he gonna do? Spin the wheels?" Jinwoo did not turn. He did not acknowledge the man in any way, a dismissal more profound than any insult. His focus was absolute. It was on her. Amara looked from his unreadable face to her parents. Her mother's expression was a mixture of shock and apprehension. Her father looked wary, protective. They did not know this man. He had appeared from nowhere, a specter of quiet authority. She should have said no. Every instinct for self-preservation, honed over 2 years of vulnerability, screamed at her to refuse. This man was dangerous. It wasn't in a flashy, obvious way. It was in the stillness, in the absolute certainty of his movements. He was a predator, and this ballroom was just a temporary habitat. But then she thought of Henderson's jeering face. She thought of the averted eyes and the flimsy excuses. She thought of the slow, grinding humiliation of the last hour. And she met Jinwoo's gaze. "I'd love to," she said, her voice clearer and stronger than she expected. A small, almost imperceptible shift occurred in his expression. It wasn't a smile. It was something less overt. Approval. He did not try to pull her from her chair. He did not ask her father to push her onto the dance floor. Instead, he did something that silenced the entire room. He knelt. He went down on one knee, the fine fabric of his trousers pressing into the polished marble floor without a moment's hesitation. He brought himself down to her level, his eyes looking directly into hers. The gesture was not one of supplication. It was one of command. He was changing the rules of the room, bringing the world down to her height instead of forcing her to reach for it. He held out a hand. It was a beautiful hand, elegant and strong, with clean, short nails. A faint, silvery scar traced a line across his knuckles. A hand that knew things other than holding champagne flutes. "May I?" he asked. Her heart did a slow, painful thump against her ribs. She placed her hand in his. His skin was warm, his grip firm and confident. He brought her hand to his shoulder, resting it there. Then, he placed his other hand on the back of her chair, where her father's or mother's hand would normally be. The orchestra, sensing a moment, shifted from a boisterous big band number to a slow, haunting waltz. And they danced. He didn't spin her. He guided her chair with a fluid, preternatural grace, moving them in slow, concentric circles in the center of the floor. His body moved with the music, his kneeling form a perfect counterweight to her seated one. They were a strange, magnetic sight. A seated queen and her kneeling consort. He was leading, not her body, but her chair, making it an extension of the dance, not an impediment to it. He leaned in closer, his voice a low murmur against her ear, meant only for her. "The man who insulted you. His name is Richard Henderson." It wasn't a question. "I know," she whispered, the scent of cedar filling her senses. "He owes my organization a significant amount of money," Jinwoo continued, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "And he has been difficult to persuade. Seeing his disrespect for you has clarified my thinking on the matter." Amara's blood went cold. Organization. Debt. This was not just a wealthy businessman. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The stillness, the authority, the casual mention of a man's name as if it were a death sentence. Korean. Chicago. The whispers you heard about the old families, the empires that ran the city from the shadows. She had just accepted a dance with the Korean Mafia. The dance ended. The music faded, and a scattered, uncertain applause broke out. Jinwoo did not rise. He remained on one knee before her, his hand still resting on the back of her chair. "Your parents seem distressed," he observed quietly. "It is no longer safe for you here." "Safe?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What are you talking about? A man like Henderson does not take public humiliation well. Especially from me," Jinwoo said, his gaze flicking toward the businessman, who was now staring at them with a mixture of fury and dawning fear. "He will see you as a vulnerability, a way to get to me." He rose to his feet in one fluid motion. He turned to her father, who had moved to stand protectively beside his daughter's chair. "Mr. and Mrs. Evans," Jinwoo said, his tone shifting to one of polite, unassailable command. "I will be taking you and your daughter home. My car is waiting." "I don't think so," David said, his voice hard. "We don't know who you are. You know that I am the only man in this room who showed your daughter the respect she deserves," Jinwoo countered, his voice soft but edged with steel. "And you know that the man who insulted her is now my enemy, which makes anyone associated with me a target. You will come with me." It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. The ride from the hotel was a cocoon of tense silence. Jinwoo's car was a black sedan with windows so dark they seemed to drink the city lights. It moved through traffic with an unnerving smoothness, flanked by two other identical cars. Her parents sat rigid in the back seat with her, her mother clutching her hand, her father staring out the window with a storm in his eyes. Amara sat beside Jinwoo. Or rather, her wheelchair was locked into place where a passenger seat should have been. It was a custom vehicle. The realization sent another chill through her. This was a man accustomed to accommodating unique cargo. "I had a sister," Jinwoo said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. He was looking straight ahead, his profile etched against the passing streetlights. "She was younger than me. She loved to paint. She saw colors in the world that no one else did." He paused, the silence stretching. "What happened to her?" Amara asked softly. His jaw tightened. "My world happened to her. My enemies learned she was the one thing I could not bear to lose. They took her from me, not to kill her, to break her. I was too late to stop them." He turned his head, and his dark eyes met hers in the dim light of the car. The coldness was gone, replaced by a raw, ancient pain. "I will not be too late again." That was the moment the danger became real. Not an abstract threat, but a visceral one. As if on cue, a black SUV without license plates swerved aggressively behind them. Jinwoo's driver didn't even flinch. "Sir," the driver said, his voice calm. "Henderson's men. Lose them," Jinwoo ordered, his hand instinctively moving to rest on Amara's armrest, a gesture that was both possessive and protective. The car surged forward. The city became a blur of neon and concrete. Amara was pressed back into her seat as the driver executed a series of impossible turns, weaving through traffic with the precision of a surgeon. The flanking cars moved in perfect concert, boxing out the pursuing SUV. It was terrifying, and yet there was a strange sense of calm inside their car. It was the calm of absolute competence. These men moved through violence like it was a language they were born speaking. They lost the tail in a labyrinth of industrial back alleys and emerged onto a quiet, residential street. They pulled up to a sleek, modern high-rise that looked more like a fortress than an apartment building. "A safe house," Jinwoo explained, as his men, silent and efficient, helped them out of the car and into the building. Her parents were pale, their faces a mask of fear and confusion. "We should call the police," her mother whispered. "No," Amara said, surprising herself. She looked at Jinwoo, at the cold certainty in his eyes. The police couldn't protect them from this. Not from a world of men like Henderson and men like Kwon Jinwoo. For now, The most dangerous man was also the safest. We stay with him. It was a choice. Her first deliberate step across the line. The apartment was a penthouse, a vast expanse of glass and minimalist design overlooking the glittering expanse of Chicago. It was beautiful, sterile, and utterly devoid of personal touches, save for a single, exquisite orchid on a low table. Jinwoo led them to a suite of rooms. You will be safe here. No one can get in. Later that night, Amara couldn't sleep. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a trembling exhaustion. She wheeled herself into the main living area, the smooth glide of her chair the only sound in the cavernous space. He was there, standing before the wall of glass, a silhouette against the city lights. A glass of whiskey was in his hand. He turned as she approached. You should be resting. You said you had a sister, she said, ignoring his comment. Did she hesitated. Was she like me? He was silent for a long moment, swirling the amber liquid in his glass.
No.
Not at first. They put her in a chair. A punishment meant for me. The words were clipped, each one a shard of glass. I failed to protect her. The shame of that failure is something I carry every day. That was his wound. The one vulnerability he carried. It was tied to a woman he had failed. He looked at her then, and for the first time, she understood the intensity of his reaction at the gala. In her, he didn't just see a woman being slighted. He saw a ghost. A chance to rewrite the ending of his own tragedy. A sudden, jarring crash from the direction of the service entrance shattered the quiet. A series of muffled shouts followed, then the unmistakable, sickening crack of breaking bone. Jinwoo set his glass down with a soft click. He didn't look surprised. He looked angry. They're here, he said, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. He pulled a sleek, black pistol from a hidden holster at the small of his back. The movement was so fluid, so practiced, it was like an extension of his own body. Stay here. Do not move. He disappeared into the hallway. The sounds of a brutal, efficient fight echoed through the apartment. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs. She was not a warrior. She was an architect. A student. But the girl who had existed 24 hours ago was gone. In her place was someone who had danced with the Mafia and chosen to stay. She heard a heavy thud against her door. Then the sound of the handle being forced. Her room was supposed to be safe. He had been wrong. The door burst open. A large man with a brutal face and Henderson's livery stood there, a knife in his hand. His eyes widened in triumph when he saw her. The boss wants the girl, he snarled, advancing on her. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. But then, something else took over. The same steel she had used to endure the taunts, the same resolve that had made her meet Jinwoo's gaze. She would not be a victim. She would not be his sister's ghost. Her eyes darted around the room. The lamp on the bedside table. Heavy. Solid brass base. As the man lunged for her chair, she gripped the lamp, twisted her torso with all the strength she had, and swung. The brass base connected with his temple with a sickening crunch. He grunted, stumbling sideways, a look of disbelief on his face. He wasn't down, but he was dazed. That was when Jinwoo appeared in the doorway, a storm of controlled fury. He took in the scene in a fraction of a second. The intruder, the lamp in her hand, the defiant terror in her eyes. He didn't spare the man a second glance. He moved past him, his sole focus on her. Are you hurt? He demanded, his hands hovering over her, checking for injuries. Behind him, the man recovered, raising his knife for a desperate, final attack aimed at Jinwoo's back. Jinwoo, she screamed. He didn't need to turn. He reacted to her voice, spinning and disarming the man in a single, brutal motion. The fight was over in seconds. The man lay groaning on the floor. Jinwoo stood over him, his chest rising and falling. Then he turned back to her. He looked at the lamp, still clutched in her hand. He looked at the hard, unflinching resolve in her eyes. And he looked at her as if he was seeing her for the first time. Not as a damsel, not as a ghost, but as a survivor. He knelt before her, just as he had in the ballroom. He gently took the lamp from her grasp and set it aside. Then, he took her hands in his. They were trembling. "I told myself bringing you here was about protecting you from him," he said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. "That was a lie." He looked up, and his dark eyes were burning with a dangerous honesty. "It was about keeping you near me. You are the first person in a decade who has made me feel anything other than rage." It wasn't a declaration of love. It was something far more perilous. A confession. A claim. She had crossed a line tonight. She had met violence with violence. And in the aftermath, she did not feel regret. She felt a strange, terrifying sense of clarity. "I wasn't scared," she confessed, her voice a whisper. "Not for me. I was scared you wouldn't be able to stop him." A small, dark smile touched his lips. He never stood a chance. He traced the scar on his knuckles, his gaze thoughtful. "Henderson will not stop.
He knows now.
He knows that taking you is the only way to destroy me." "So, what do we do?" she asked. "We stop reacting," he said, rising. "We act. You are an architect. You see the world in structures, in weaknesses.
Think."
The gala. "Henderson, did you see or hear anything? Anything out of place?" She closed her eyes, replaying the night. The arrogance, the loud talk. He'd been bragging about a new acquisition. A white elephant he was getting for a steal. "An old theater downtown," she murmured. He called it a money pit. Something about the acoustics being a nightmare, but the steel frame being solid. She opened her eyes. "The Orpheum. It's been abandoned for years. It's a steel labyrinth inside. A perfect place for an ambush." Jinwoo looked at her with a new level of respect. "My men have been looking for his new base for weeks." He pulled out his phone and issued a series of quiet, rapid commands in Korean. When he was done, he looked back at her. "We move in 1 hour." "I'm coming with you," she said. It wasn't a question. "Amara, you need me," she stated, her voice firm. "I've studied the blueprints for that building. I know its weaknesses. I know the sight lines, the escape routes. You'll go in blind without me." He studied her for a long, silent moment. She was right. She had become an asset, a weapon. She was no longer just the woman in the chair. She was his strategist. The final confrontation was not a chaotic firefight. It was a surgical strike, orchestrated by Amara from a secure van a block away, her voice a calm presence in Jinwoo's earpiece as she guided his team through the decaying theater's maze. She was the architect of Henderson's downfall. When it was over, when Henderson was captured and his small empire dismantled, Jinwoo came back to the van. He was untouched, not a speck of dust on his immaculate suit. He dismissed his men with a nod. He stood before her, the silence between them heavy with everything that had happened. "It's over," he said. "Is it?" she asked. "Can it ever be over?" "No," he admitted. "My world does not allow for endings. Only for new beginnings." He looked at her, and the mask of the cold, calculating boss was gone. In its place was just a man, burdened and dangerous, but a man who saw her. "Henderson targeted you, because he knew, before even I was willing to admit it. He saw that you are my weakness." He reached out and placed a hand on the armrest of her chair, a simple, grounding touch. "And my strength," he finished, his voice low. A cost had been paid. Her old life was gone forever. Her parents would be relocated, given new identities, safe but a world away. She was an orphan of circumstance, adrift in a violent, opulent world she had never asked for. She could leave. Jinwoo would arrange it. He would give her a new life, a safe one, far away from him. He would do it to protect her, and it would break him all over again. She looked at his hand, resting near hers. She thought of the loneliness of her old life, the quiet indignities, the feeling of being an object of pity. Here, in this violent world, with this dangerous man, she had never felt more seen, more alive, more powerful. Slowly, deliberately, she covered his hand with her own. His fingers curled, lacing through hers. It was not a promise of a happy ending. It was not a declaration of love. It was a choice, an acceptance of a new, dangerous, and inevitable truth. She was staying, and he was never letting her go.